Across the country, there are towns that never sprinted into the future. Some hit the brakes on purpose. Others just let the highway pass them by. Walk their main streets and it feels like 1963 is still on the calendar, still in the barber gossip, still in the soda fountain glow. These places aren't ghost towns. They have schools, parades, diners, and habits that never needed an upgrade. Today we're stepping inside 10 real American towns where the 60s didn't get revived or rebranded. They simply never left. No theme sets, no nostalgia marketing, just time refusing to move. And wait until you see the one that still runs on a rule book the rest of us forgot. Number 10. Red Cloud, Nebraska. If you blink while driving through the prairie, you might miss it. But once you're on Main Street, it feels like the calendar quietly slid back to 1963 and nobody bothered to fix it. The storefronts are low and brick, the signs are plain and a little sun-faded, and the whole block has that no-rush posture you only get in farm towns that never tried to outgrow themselves. You don't see trendy, you see still works. There's a church that anchors the skyline, a family diner where breakfast comes with a real "how's your mom doing?" and small county seat businesses that look like they've been doing the same honest job since the Kennedy years. Red Cloud isn't a movie set, and it isn't doing retro for tourists. It's a prairie town that developed slowly, then decided slow was fine. People still wave from porches. The downtown still matters. The pace still belongs to daylight and harvest seasons, not notifications. That's why it hits like a time capsule without trying to. It's just mid-century small-town America, still living in its own rhythm. Here's the real-life grounding. Red Cloud's population is about 991 people as of 2023. That's not a suburb. That's a community where faces repeat, names stick, and new arrivals get noticed in a gentle, curious way. Housing is the kind of number that makes city people do a double take. The median listing price around September 2025 is about $142,500. Zillow's average home value sits near the $100,000 mark. In a country where affordable often feels like a fairy tale, Red Cloud quietly keeps it real. But that calm has a trade. The job pool is thin. Most work is local, steady, and tied to the rhythms of a small rural county. If you're chasing a big career ladder, you might find the ladder ends early. And socially, this is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, which can feel comforting if you want roots, or a little disorienting if you're used to anonymity. Red Cloud gives you quiet, safety, and space to breathe, but it also asks you to slow down enough to belong. Picture a late afternoon here. You step out of the diner with coffee in your hand, the air smelling like cut grass and distant farms. A pickup rolls by at 30 miles an hour, and the driver lifts too. Fingers off the wheel in a wave that means, I see you, you're part of this street now. No one is performing nostalgia, they're just living it. And if that sounds restful, the next town on our list freezes the 60s in an even sweeter way, like a soda fountain that never shut down. Number 9. Bell Buckle, Tennessee. If a milkman ever decided to come back for one last route, he'd probably start here. Bell Buckle sits in the soft hills of central Tennessee, wrapped around a railroad pass that never really let go. You roll into town and the first thing you notice is how small everything feels in the best way. A cluster of old storefronts hugs the tracks. A general store still looks like it expects you to pay with a smile and a handshake, and antique shops spill out onto the sidewalk like the town decided the 1960s were already good enough decor. The porches are real, the signage is hand-painted, and the air has that slow Saturday hum even on a Tuesday. This place isn't trying to be a retro destination. It became one by refusing to rush. Bell Buckle's historic downtown is known for antiques, quilts, handmade crafts, and the kind of friendly small-town hospitality that feels almost suspiciously wholesome. Every year, the town leans into the same old-school rhythm with local festivals that have been running for decades, like the R.C. Cola Moon Pie celebration that turns Railroad Square into a time warp with bluegrass, parades, and lawn chairs that have probably seen 3 generations of the same family. The result is a town that feels paused, not because it's stuck, but because it's content to stay gentle. Now let's pin it to real life. Bell Buckle is tiny. The 2020 census put the population at about 410 people, and recent local and travel profiles still describe it as a 400-something person town. That's the kind of size where you don't just recognize faces, you recognize cars, dogs, and who makes the best banana pudding. On paper, housing looks like a postcard too, but here's the surprise. The vibe costs more than you think. The median property value was roughly $321,400 in 2023. By September-October 2025, median listing prices were around $490K to $498K. So yes, Bell Buckle feels like 1962, but the housing market has definitely heard of 2025. That's the trade you make here. You get calm, character, and a community that still treats Main Street like a living room. But you pay a premium for that charm, and the job options stay small town small. If you're coming from a city, the adjustment isn't just slower Wi-Fi. It's learning to be seen again every day by people who mean well and remember everything. Picture an afternoon in Bell Buckle. You step out of a diner where the coffee comes fast and the conversation takes its time. A freight train slides past, not loud enough to interrupt anyone, just loud enough to remind you what built this place. Someone waves from a porch as if you've always belonged there. If that kind of quiet feels like a vacation for your nervous system, keep going, because the next town freezes the 60s in a totally different flavor. Neon, motels, and highway America that still glows after dark. Number 8. The Wildwoods, New Jersey. You know that feeling when you find an old postcard and realize the colors haven't faded? That's what it's like stepping into the Wildwoods. The shoreline here still wears its mid-century look without apology. Along Ocean Avenue and the streets near the boardwalk, doo-wop motels glow in pastel blocks with googie-style signs that curve and sparkle like the space-age future people imagined in 1960. At dusk, the neon doesn't feel like decoration. It feels like the town's heartbeat turning on. Walk the boardwalk and you'll see why this place belongs on a list like this. Retro arcades still hum with pinball clacks and prize booth laughter. The font on old hotel marquees looks like it never met a design update it liked. Even the way the blocks are laid out makes you move slower, like your body remembers summers that happened decades before you were born. The Wildwoods aren't staging nostalgia, they're living inside an architectural time capsule. There's a reason for that. The Wildwoods Shore Resort Historic District, often called the Doo-Wop Motel District, has more than 200 motels and buildings built in the 1950s and 1960s, one of the largest concentrations of mid-century commercial resort architecture in the U.S. So when you feel like the condo boom skipped this shoreline, you're not imagining it. Much of the visual language really did survive. Year-round, Wildwood is small, about 5,123 residents in 2023. But in summer, the island swells massively with vacationers, pushing the population into the hundreds of thousands. That seasonal wave is the quiet trade you make with this kind of frozen-in-time charm. You get beaches and neon nights that feel like a gentler America. But you also get traffic that creeps, parking that turns into a scavenger hunt, and a town that runs on the rhythm of tourist seasons rather than everyday routine. And yes, the market knows what it's selling. Zillow puts the average Wildwood home value around $605 to $389 in 2025. Realtor.com shows median listing prices around $625K as of September 2025. So while the streets look like they paused in the 60s, owning a slice of that pause costs modern money. Picture a late evening stroll here. The air smells like salt and sunscreen. Neon reflections ripple across parked cars. Families drift past in flip-flops, and somewhere behind you an arcade bell rings like a tiny time machine. You don't have to believe in the past to relax in it. And if the Wildwoods are the 60s by the sea, the next town keeps the decade alive in another way, out on the open road where Route 66 still glows after dark. Number 7. Tucumcari, New Mexico. On most highways in America, neon is decoration now, something you shall put up to feel retro for a weekend. In Tucumcari, neon is not decor, it's livelihood. You pull off Route 66 and the town greets you the same way it has for generations. Glowing motel signs, long, low buildings, and a main drag that still understands the grammar of road trips from the late 1940s through the 1960s. At night, the light doesn't just look pretty, it keeps the town moving. The Blue Swallow Motel is the postcard you step into. Open since 1939, it's one of the most iconic Route 66 motor courts, still operating in its original style. The camel neon across the street and the neighboring vintage motels feel less like a theme and more like a neighborhood that never packed up. You can hear the old rhythm in the details, the curved glass at a classic cafe corner, the tidy rows of parking spaces meant for sedans with tail fins, the quiet pride in a sign that's been repaired instead of replaced. By day, Tucumcari runs on simple pleasures, a diner with stools that have seen thousands of breakfasts, a coffee refill that arrives before you ask. Route 66 shields nailed to storefronts like badges, not souvenirs. Around you, travelers slow down the way people used to slow down when the road itself was part of the vacation. Tucumcari keeps that habit alive. The numbers ground the mood. Tucumcari is a small Route 66 city of roughly 5,000 people, about 5.2K in 2023 and around 5,007 in 2025. Housing stays relatively affordable by today's standards. Realtor.com shows a median listing price about $172,500 in September 2025. Zillow's recent median list price is around $201,000, still low compared to most of the West. The town's cost of entry is gentle, which is part of why it attracts people looking for quiet and space. But Tucumcari's calm has a season to it. Tourism is the engine here, and it runs strongest when the weather is kind and the road trippers are out. Off-season, the pace thins and job options narrow. It's a place where you can build a life, but you build it knowing the ladder isn't tall. For some people, that's a relief. For others, it's a limit. Picture an evening drive through town. The sky's purple, the desert air cools fast, and one neon sign after another flickers on like a slow applause. You park, walk to a diner, and feel your shoulders drop because nobody is chasing the clock. If that's your kind of rest, stay with me. Route 66 has an even more famous holdout ahead, one revived by a barbershop and a little drive-in, like a real-life version of the road stories we grew up on. Number 6. Seligman, Arizona. Route 66 has a lot of towns that remember the past. Seligman is different. This town refused to let the past die, and it all started with one barber who wouldn't put his scissors down. When I-40 bypassed Seligman in the late 70s, the road went quiet. Businesses emptied, and the town could have faded like so many others. But Angel Delgadillo looked at that silence and treated it like a challenge. 1987, he helped spark the push to mark the highway as historic Route 66, and Seligman became the birthplace of the route's revival. You feel that decision everywhere. The street is short, sun-bright, and stitched with old-fashioned roadside swagger. Classic cars sit angled like they're still mid-trip. A barbershop turned Route 66 gift store still carries the energy of a working main street, not a museum hallway. And then there's Delgadillo's Snowcap Drive-In, built in 1953 from scrap lumber and family stubbornness. The place is small, playful, and proudly weird in a gentle way. Hand-painted signs, a jukebox mood, and the kind of diner charm that doesn't need to try hard because it never stopped being itself. Seligman feels paused in the 60s not because time got stuck, but because the town chose to keep the roadside spirit alive. It's the soft clatter of a screen door, the glow of neon that means you're welcome to stop, the slow friendliness of people who have seen the highway come and go but stayed anyway. Grounding it in real life, Seligman is tiny, about 731 residents in the 2023 American Community Survey. That size creates a particular kind of calm. Fewer crowds, fewer complications, and a community where names don't disappear. Housing is still on the low end for Arizona. Zillow puts the average home value around $147,947 in 2025. Living here doesn't require a big city budget. But the town's charm comes with distance. Medical care, major grocery options, and many everyday services sit far out on the map. If you're raising small kids or planning for retirement, you don't move here blindly. You move here knowing you're trading convenience for quiet, and that the quiet is real. Picture an early evening in Seligman. The desert light turns gold. A neon sign buzzes on, and the road feels like it's telling stories under its breath. You eat a simple burger, listen to the jukebox, and watch travelers roll in with that look that says, "I didn't know places like this were still here." If that makes you want to keep exploring, good, because the next town on our list holds the 60s in a completely different way through a deliberate reinvention that began right inside that decade. Number 5, Leavenworth, Washington. Some towns drift into the past by accident. Leavenworth walked into it on purpose, signed the papers, and never looked back. In the early 1960s, after rail and timber declines hollowed out the local economy, town leaders made a gamble: remake the downtown into a Bavarian-style village to bring visitors back. What began as an economic rescue plan became the town's identity. And more than half a century later, the spell is still working. You feel it the moment you arrive. Main Street runs through a postcard version of mid-century Bavaria. Gable roofs, carved wood balconies, flower boxes, and hand-painted signs that look like they were meant to last longer than trends. Winter turns the surrounding cascades into a snow-bright backdrop, and the village lights up as if Christmas never learned to leave. Festivals roll through the year with the same old-world rhythm: music in the square, warm bread smells in the air, shop windows stacked with ornaments and crafts. It doesn't feel like cosplay, it feels like a community that agreed on a story and decided to live inside it. Leavenworth is small, but it doesn't behave small. The population sits around 2.7 thousand people as of 2023. Yet millions of visitors pass through each year, especially for holiday season and alpine outdoor trips, so the town often feels larger than its census number. That flow of people is part of what freezes the vibe in time. Visitors come seeking an earlier, simpler version of Vacation America, and Leavenworth gladly keeps the stage lights on. But here's the modern reality underneath the timbered facades. Housing is expensive because the charm is famous. Zillow estimates the average home value around $671K in 2025. Realtor.com shows median listing prices near $899K in September 2025. So while the sidewalks look like the 60s never ended, buying into that feeling costs very 2025 money. Crowds are the other price. On peak weekends, the streets fill fast, parking becomes a slow puzzle, and the town's gentle pace has to share space with tourism momentum. Still, there's a reason people keep coming back. Picture a cold afternoon, snow on the roofs, a brass band warming up somewhere down the block, the smell of pretzels and coffee drifting through the air. You step into a little shop, hear the bell above the door, and for a moment your phone feels less important than the street you're standing on. Leavenworth isn't stuck in the past. It's curating it, carefully, intentionally, and with a price tag attached. And if this is a 60s time capsule built by design, the next town on our list holds on to the decade in a more natural way, where boardwalk rock and summer rhythm still sound like the Beach Boys never stopped playing. Number 4, Asbury Park, New Jersey. Walk into Convention Hall and you can almost hear 1964 hanging in the rafters. Not as a soundtrack playing loud, but as a faint echo that the building never shook off. This boardwalk landmark has hosted rock and roll since the 1950s, and by the mid-1960s it was booking major acts that defined the era. So when you stand under its old arches and look toward the beach, it doesn't feel like a museum. It feels like a place where the past is still allowed to breathe. Step back outside and the boardwalk carries that same pulse. The long promenade, the weathered facades, the old arcade spaces. There's a rhythm here that belongs to summers when teenagers came down from the city, coins in their pockets and music in their heads. Even now, the retro arcades keep pinball and classic games alive, not as a gimmick, but as part of the Shoreline's DNA. You don't need to know the history to feel it. You just feel your pace slow down, like your body is sinking to a decade that never worried about constant updates. Asbury Park isn't frozen because nothing changed. It's frozen because certain things refuse to leave. The hall, the boardwalk, the idea that a beach town can be a cultural stage, those roots stayed planted, and they still shape the way the town shows up to you today. Equal parts seaside stroll and rock and roll memory. Here's the grounded reality. Asbury Park has roughly 15,000 people, about 15.4K in the 2023 estimate, and around 15.5K projected for 2025. Big enough to feel alive year-round, small enough that the shoreline is still the town's living room. But the price of living inside this kind of nostalgia is modern. Zillow's average home value sits around $670,000 in 2025. Realtor.com shows median listing prices around $699,000 in September 2025. In other words, the vibe may be mid-century, but the housing bill is current-day New Jersey. That's the trade-off. You get a coastal town where an evening walk feels like a scene from a gentler America. But staying long-term usually means you need steady income, because rent and mortgages here don't match the slow tempo of the boardwalk. Picture the late afternoon light turning soft over the ocean. You pass the old hall, hear distant music from somewhere down the street, and step into an arcade where the bells and flippers still sound like summer. It's relaxing in a way that doesn't ask anything from you except to be present. And if Asbury Park keeps the 60s alive through rock and boardwalk memory, the next town on our list holds on to the decade through hippie spirit. Real, lived in, not souvenir shop nostalgia. Number 3. Madrid, New Mexico. Madrid doesn't feel like a town that forgot to move on. It feels like a town that got rescued by the 1960s, then decided the rescue was too good to give back. This place started as a coal mining boomtown on the Turquoise Trail, then slid into near ghost town quiet when the mines shut down. In the 60s and 70s, artists, hippies, and other wanderers began drifting in, taking over old miner cabins and storefronts, turning Madrid into an art outpost that never quite left that era behind. You see that story painted on the street itself. The main road is small and slightly crooked, lined with galleries that look like they grew out of the desert rather than being installed. Hand-painted signs tilt in the sun. A weathered bar opens its doors like it's been waiting for the same friends for 50 years. There are sculptures in yards that don't try to match anything except the owner's imagination. The surrounding Santa Fe high desert keeps the light clean and bright, so every color on those walls feels a little louder, a little more alive. Madrid's charm isn't polished. It's human, creative, relaxed, and pleasantly unconcerned with being modern. That's why it feels paused in time. The mining economy ended, and instead of filling the gap with something new, Madrid let a counterculture community rebuild it in their own image. The town kept the old bones, added art, and leaned into slowness. Today, it still plays like a desert version of the late 60s spirit. Independent, a bit eccentric, and very comfortable doing things its own way. Now, the real-life grounding. Madrid is tiny. The 2020 census counted 247 people, and Data USA reported about 248 residents in 2023, basically a couple hundred neighbors sharing one long street. World Population Review estimates around 308 people for 2025, still very small. With a place this size, community isn't an abstract idea. It's who you'll see at the coffee counter and who you'll pass walking to the gallery. But the economics are not tiny town cheap. Realtor.com shows a median listing price of about $443,000 in September 2025. So the vibe is 1969, but the housing market is current-day Santa Fe County. That's the trade-off. Madrid offers freedom, art, and a kind of everyday calm you can't download. Yet services are limited, jobs are sparse, and many people experience it more as a weekend refuge than a place to build a big, conventional career. Picture a late afternoon here. The desert air cools, shop windows glow softly, and someone is tuning a guitar on a porch without hurrying. You wander from gallery to gallery, not because you have a plan, but because time feels gentle. If Madrid is hippie spirit in the desert, the next town keeps that same spirit alive in a very different landscape. New England with co-ops, bookstores, and a community that still sounds like 1969 in conversation. Number 2, Brattleboro, Vermont. Walk into the food co-op here and you feel it right away. This is not a town that treats community as a slogan. It treats it as a habit. The Brattleboro Food Co-op began as a small buying club in 1975, growing out of the back-to-the-land cooperative spirit that swept through Vermont after the 1960s. Today, it's still a daily gathering point, part grocery, part town square, where the shelves look curated by neighbors, not algorithms. Step outside and the rest of Brattleboro matches that tone. Independent bookstores sit a short walk from art studios and small cafes that feel more like living rooms than businesses. Street corners host musicians on warm evenings. Bulletin boards advertise potlucks, workshops, and local causes with the quiet confidence of a place that expects people to show up for each other. This is how the 60s stayed alive here, not as costumes, but as a civic rhythm, co-ops, handmade culture, and the belief that a town works better when people know the names behind the counters. Travel writers have long called Brattleboro a place where the counterculture lingered, now grounding it in real numbers. Brattleboro is small but not tiny. The Brattleboro CDP had about 7,793 residents in 2023. If you see older figures closer to 6,000, those are usually from earlier decades or from different boundary counts. In any case, you feel the scale in daily life, big enough for variety, small enough that community is still visible. Housing sits in the middle of Vermont's rising market. Realtor.com shows a median listing price around $442.5K in September 2025. So Brattleboro isn't a cheap hideout, but it's also not a luxury enclave. You're paying for a livable, arts-anchored town in a state where prices have climbed. The trade-offs are real. Vermont winters are long, dark, and stubborn. If you need constant motion, you might feel that season pressing in. And even with co-op spirit, everyday costs here aren't low. Brattleboro rewards patience and a slower calendar. People who come looking for peace and creativity usually love it. People who come craving a fast career ladder can feel restless. Picture a late autumn morning. The air smells like wood smoke and cold leaves. You step into the co-op, grab coffee, and chat with someone you met last week, but who remembers your name anyway. There's no rush to be someone else here. If this is hippie spirit still breathing in New England, the final town on our list goes even quieter. No neon, no slogans, just time sitting gently in a place that never felt the need to hurry. Number 1, Dunsmuir, California. There are towns where time crashes. Dunsmuir is a town where time seems to step aside politely, like it doesn't want to disturb the river or the pines. You reach it by winding north through the forests of Siskiyou County, and suddenly Main Street feels like an older kind of America that never needed a rebrand. The streets are small and slightly sloped. The motels sit low along the roadside, many of them born in the post-war travel boom, still wearing the practical mid-century look of a place built for families on the move. Dunsmuir grew up as a railroad town. In the late 1800s, it formed around the Southern Pacific Line, and for decades the tracks and depots were the center of work and identity here. Even after rail jobs shrank, the town kept that working-class spine, a historic station, a walkable strip of diners and small shops, and a rhythm shaped more by seasons and visitors than by city schedules. You can feel the after-war 1950s-60s roadside culture in the way the town is laid out, like it was designed for people who traveled slow enough to stop. The landscape does half the storytelling. The Sacramento River runs close and cold, threading through town like a steady soundtrack. Trails start almost at your doorstep. In the morning, you might see fly fishers moving quietly along the banks. In the evening, the air smells like wood smoke and wet stone. Dunsmuir doesn't push for your attention. It just makes it easy to exhale. Here's the real-life grounding. Dunsmuir is small, around 1,618 people in 2024, and projected about 1,595 or 1,596 for 2025. In California terms, that's a pocket-sized community. Housing is relatively Gentle for the state. Realtor.com shows a median listing price around $325K in September 2025. Zillow's average home value sits near $232K in 2025. It's not cheap by national standards, but for California, it feels like finding a quiet back door into affordability. But the calm comes with distance. Bigger hospitals, major shopping, and many everyday services are not right around the corner. The local economy leans on tourism, outdoor recreation, and the flow of highway travelers. Jubilee Railroad Plug 1. If you're building a life here, you plan for that, especially if you're thinking about retirement or raising young kids. Picture a late afternoon in Dunsmuir. You walk past the old station, hear a train horn soften in the valley, then follow the slope down toward a family diner where the windows glow warm. The day feels unhurried, but not empty. Like the town is saying, stay as long as you like, we're not going anywhere. And that leaves a question worth sitting with. Is preserving the past a way to protect ourselves from the future, or a way to hold on to what we're afraid of losing? So what did we really find on this ride through America's paused corners? These towns are not stuck because they failed. They are paused because they chose what to keep. A slower Main Street, a neighbor who waves first, a diner that doesn't need a rebrand to feel like home. But every pause has a price. Convenience gets thinner, seasons get louder, and the modern world sits farther away. Whether that trade feels like freedom or frustration depends on what you're chasing. Now I want to hear from you. Which town felt like a deep breath and which one felt like too much time standing still? Could you live there for a year or only visit for a weekend? Drop your pick and your hard pass in the comments. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with me, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who misses porch life. See you in the next story.